Today is the FOMC meeting where Jerome Powell will talk about whether the Federal Reserve is going to lower rates. Now, Bitcoin has been on a week-long tear to the upside until today. Is today's price action related to fears about what Jerome Powell will or won't do? Well, we'll take a look at it. We'll also look deeper at the markets and see what price action is suggesting today. Welcome to the Crypto Rain channel and our family. Now, have you ever wanted to solve your money problems by making your money work so well for you, you didn't have to worry about money again? Almost like Forrest Gump after the shrimp boat businesses went so well for him. Well, how would that feel? Because isn't that really why we came into crypto? So what if you learned to use your money to work for you just right so that you didn't have to worry about it again? Well, I grew up poor in life, which meant secondhand clothes, packed lunches every day for school. And it isn't bad to grow up that way. But I realized the true value of money is that it allows us options in life, options you just don't have when you don't have any money. Perhaps we also want to afford some nicer things that we want and maybe some travel. Well, after a few months of being in crypto, when I started 8 years ago, I recognized that crypto investment done right had the most amazing, massive potential to allow us to get to a place where we didn't have to worry about money again. But I found there's a huge catch. Crypto investment works amazingly well towards your goals when you take the right actions, yet so many don't. You see, I know people that have been here longer than I have, and they are still stuck where they were when they started 9-10 years ago, barely getting by. I also learned that 95% of people in crypto don't make meaningful money or flat out lose money. It's really only about 5% of crypto investors that make life-changing gains that take them into the lifestyle we all dreamed about as kids. Well, haven't we learned in life that if you find what the successful are doing and you copy exactly how they do things, you start having their results? So when I was new, I focused on figuring out what those 5% did, and I put it into practice myself. And by 2021, using these principles I share now, I was able to fire my day job and put myself in position to never have to work again. And here on this channel is where I share what I learned. I share my research on the companies I like and why I like them. And today is our price analysis day. This is a day where we combine what I've learned with our special guest, Paul, joining us from DEVVE. Now, Paul has 30 years price analysis experience analyzing charts and price movements. And it's a fun time looking at the price movements of what is happening to see what might be cheap, what might be really cheap, and what might be expensive, and what might be about to explode. Note, if you are looking to be part of that 5% that makes life-changing gains, you might consider joining the Patreon in the link below that will give you access to our Rainmaker private Discord. Surrounding yourself with people who have learned and are learning to do things the right way is exactly how you get good at this. Do note, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a crypto investor myself. Paul looks at many different markets. None of this is be taken as financial advice. Well, you probably already have. Go ahead and make it rain on that like button. Strap in for the show. Help me welcome Paul from DEVVE.
Hello, guys. Hi. FOMC day, interesting day. We're going to see what they're going to do. The smart money is saying nothing at all, which is possible. But I think given that wars escalated and probably will last longer than they think, it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world if they were to cut interest rates by 0.25, but maybe not do it this time, maybe just sort of talk about it and intimate they might do it next time, which the market will get excited about. And we've seen an easing of risk off, i.e. we've seen risk off being the main theme because of war, and that starts to reverse with oil prices, which we can have a look at. Oil's come down, but gold and silver are stuck in consolidation, so we're not getting any clues from there. Equity markets have slipped, but may be ready to have a rally because it's quite rare that sentiment is this negative and the market continues to go down. So if I had to make a guess as to what happens, we've only got a couple of hours until the actual announcement is made, I would say that a knee-jerk reaction, which is usually the first move, would be that the markets go lower, certainly from an equity point of view, and then they rally back up. But I don't think even if they do rally, that this is out of the woods. This consolidation that we're seeing looking fairly toppy in the equity markets now. So I think we've got to tread carefully and see what's developing. But we can go through the charts and see what's happening. But it's nice to see a rally in Bitcoin. It's nice to see a rally in ETH. And there may be a bit more to squeeze out of this. But I'm reluctant to call an absolute low here, just because we'll see. There's just some trend lines and stuff that I think need to be broken before we can talk about a complete reversal. So, which I think will come at some point this year. It's just a question whether it's here now. Now, I'm happy to be wrong. I'd be very happy if I am wrong, and it's all sorts of rallies ahead of it. And what might be nice is if we see altcoins rallying ahead of Bitcoin, something to kind of surprise the market. Now, that would be really unusual, and you might say, well, then it's never going to do that. But you'd be surprised. The markets do strange things. They do very strange things. When you expect an altcoin rally because Bitcoin's rallied, it doesn't rally. And then when you expect it to be the weakest product, sometimes it just doesn't work like that, and it becomes the strongest. So that's one thing I would say, you say at the top of the show, which is very interesting about learning from other people. I always think that you never really know everything you can never really know everything about the markets. And if anyone who thinks they do, or is very arrogant, or kind of not arrogant, but very thinks they've solved it, probably hasn't. And they might have a worldview that works for a bit, and then the markets change. And I think that's a really important thing to remember when it comes to investing, that the markets can be in a state for a very long time that makes it feel very predictable. And then it changes. The dynamics can completely change, and you have to adapt with it. And that's why people who've been in the markets for a long time have seen these changes happen and are looking for the unexpected, as it were. So it's why things never seem to follow the news flow in the way we expect. And we've spoken a few times on the channel about contrary opinion theory, and you talked about that when you were in the property market, and how you'd always be looking at properties before the markets had gone up. And it's very similar in any asset market, any trading market. If you see people panicking in, it's usually a bad sign, or panicking out, it's usually the wrong time to be doing it. But there are times when people panic and it is the right time to do it, because it's part of a bigger move. So, but those times are rare, and it's kind of working out whether we're at the big top or whether we're in minor tops. And usually we're in minor tops, and everyone expects a reversal, or have been calling a reversal. Certainly in the equity markets, that's been wrong. And more recently in Bitcoin, those people calling for a top were right. They called for a top, but those people you'll probably find were calling for a top from about $20,000 in Bitcoin all the way up to 120, and then said, look, I'm right, because it's come off 120. So you got to put everything into context.
Well, what's funny is that idea of contrarian theory, right? And it does play out, because if everyone's expecting something, it usually doesn't play out that way. And last year was a perfect example. Bitcoin and altcoins had been following this pattern for 2 cycles, where in 2017, the year after the Bitcoin halving, 2013, the year after the Bitcoin halving, Bitcoin went crazy. 2017, Bitcoin and alts went crazy. 2021, Bitcoin and alts went crazy. And so it seemed like 80% of us in the crypto markets were thinking, wow, probably it'll continue on that 4-year cycle. But my biggest concern about that was that so many people were expecting it this time, because in 2021, that wasn't the case. There wasn't enough data points to know. And so most people didn't expect it to run the way it did in 2021. But everyone was expecting it to run in 2025, and yet it didn't. And perhaps it didn't because everyone was expecting it, because the markets throw a wrench in your system. I have found that the people that make serious money in crypto, they play a specific pattern, in that they generally buy well-researched projects when they're devastatingly low during the bear market. And then when everybody is FOMOing into crypto, that's when they sell. And it's like, that is the method really that works. It takes patience. It takes an understanding that some of the businesses you invest in are going to fail, and it's okay, because the ones that survive and do well usually make up for those losses by huge amounts. And so you're still way ahead of what any other asset class can do. And it seems simple, but it's hard actually going through it. Most people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm just going to buy when it's low and sell when it's high. It's like, it does make sense, but that doesn't mean it isn't emotionally hard when some of the things that you invest in do go out of business and they go to zero. And then you're like, and then it feels like you're investing against the rest of the market. Everyone else is saying sell when you're buying, and everyone else is saying buy when you sell. And it's because you are going against the rest of the market. 95% of people don't actually do things this way. So it's hard. It actually washes out a lot of people, because especially during the bear market, because it's like being in a pressure cooker.
I do wonder whether AI will change the state of the market, but we've had technological advances before. And I remember when computer trading came along, because remember, it was all human trading before computers came along, and then you could compute orders where you could do millions of trades, literally millions of trades a second. And people said, oh, the market's changed, but I don't think it really has. It's still kind of driven by human emotion, which it needs to be. And then I do wonder, though, whether AI will change the dynamics of the market, perhaps. But there will be people who say, I can just create an AI bot and it will trade for me. We saw quite a lot of that in the run-up. I wonder how well they would have done or are doing now, whether they adjusted to the correction or what trading plans they would put in. So it's because I'm not using those models, I'm kind of asking and answering my own question. I'm just kind of thinking about how this will play out in the future. The problem with these models might be that they're opaque and you don't really know what they're doing and why they're doing it. At least when you have your own strategy, whatever that might be, your strategy is a value investor looking at value products, investing in and stepping into the market when you feel right with real money, looking for a reversal. And if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But if you've got a system that's just saying buy or sell or whatever, and it's doing well, that's fine. But if it's not doing well, you're like, then what do you do? Do you exit those positions? Do you not take them? What is it seeing? So I think that could end up being the problem with AI, that we don't know why it's making those decisions, and then it's very difficult to trust it.
I know some people that have been involved with trying to program AI, and the challenge is other people kind of figure things out, and then it changes the way markets operate, and then the rules of it no longer work. And I mean, what I do, part of why what I do works so well is it's about unequal information. Like, I think if most people look deeper at some of the ones I really like, OMI is a good example, or Illuvium, and maybe they still wouldn't buy, because right now they're so outside the narrative. It feels, which is just an emotion, it feels like it's never going to come back into the narrative, but it doesn't play out that way. It always cycles back around. So it's like OMI, the price is at really close to bear market lows, and yet the company itself is really, really strong. So some people aren't buying it just because they're unaware of the situation it's in. It's got incoming revenues versus most of the crypto projects out there. Most don't have incoming revenues. And so it's in this strong financial position over most of the other altcoins. And it's just digital collectibles is outside the narrative. So nobody's focusing on it right now. And it feels like it will never happen. And I've just seen that is the time to buy, much like when I was in real estate. When I bought, everyone was saying how terrible real estate was. real estate was outside the narrative, and people would say, no, it's better to keep your money in the bank. No, it's better to keep it in stock. Stocks are up, 4 years in a row. And it's like, wait, you mean, oh, I can sell my real estate for lows and buy stocks at high? Is that what you're suggesting? Like, that's not how I do things. I understand buying low and then selling high is how you make money. What you're suggesting is that I sell low and I buy high because that's where the trend is. But I don't want to be where the trend is now. I want to be where the trend is going to be before it gets there, because that's how you make money in what I do with crypto trading. And some people are unprepared for that type of thing. It takes guts and it's hard, but everyone that I know that have made millions of dollars from crypto, that's exactly what they've done. They've held for longer periods. They bought when, everyone was talking bad about crypto and thinking it would never come back. And then they waited till it did.
It is interesting that the coins don't necessarily reflect what's going on with the actual company itself, and unless you look into what's going on with the company, you wouldn't know that there's that disparity. I mean, from a technical point of view, when I look at OMI, and we're going to obviously look at the chart, it wouldn't be one, and I've said this a few times, that it wouldn't be one that I'd be holding. But I also respect the fact that the market does this for periods of time and then it all comes back. And I also know, I talked to Manu about DFINITY and how well everything's going, and it's like, why isn't the coin going higher? And it's like, well, it seems it's a real conundrum. And then, but the market, it's market sentiment. It's not necessarily following what the fundamentals are. And we talked about the analogy.
That's where the money is. Yeah, that sometimes there's this huge latency effect where you have, like, and I didn't bring up DFINITY. It's also one of my favorites because you work for them, and I know you get uncomfortable when we're talking about DFINITY. But I love when fundamentals are really, really strong. And in crypto, you can find this. It just takes a lot of work and research. And fundamentals are really, really strong, and yet the token price is so low.
Yeah.
And then it just takes patience, right? So it's just patience. And what's funny is the market can stay irrational longer than a lot of people have patience. And then all of a sudden it catches up.
That was an old Milton Friedman quote about the markets. The market can stay irrational longer than you can stay liquid. But it is interesting. I mean, it is interesting because you've done your research on OMI, and you as much as you can know, right? There's always unknowns, right? But but we look at it through different lenses. I look at things through different lenses. It's obviously I'm not here to analyze DFINITY, but I do know that when I speak to somebody who says, that this doesn't reflect what's going on, and it's a head scratcher, it's like, well, yeah, I can, then I'm connected to it. Then I know there's somebody I trust who's telling me that there is this disparity. But if I don't know anyone who works at OMI, or I don't know what to look for, I couldn't say that disparity is there. But also that's my fault, because I wouldn't be bothered to do the sort of research that you've done to know that there is that there, if you see what I mean. So
I wonder if that's where some of the value in the future, at least for my type of trading on AI, is, so I can get better information, because the AI can research to levels that save humans incredible amounts of time. And so people have been trying to do AI trading, essentially algorithm trading, because all AI is programmed algorithms. And now with AI, they're feeding it larger and larger data sets that it's using to help it learn. But algorithm trading, people have been trying to crack that for forever, and they might crack it and it works for a while. But then as their competitors change what they're doing, then whatever system they were using doesn't work anymore. However, like what I plan to use it for in the coming bear market is research and identify more companies that I especially like during this bear market when altcoin prices are so low. It's like, which companies have revenues coming in? Which companies have plenty of revenues to last until the market turns around? So that I know that's going to make the survival rates of what I invest in go better, because you know, in 2018 through 2020, 2/3 of what I invested in, the companies went under. They just failed. And it's like during this bear market, perhaps 35% to 40% of what I invested in has failed or will fail. And you just have to deal with the failure rate. But maybe AI this next time can help with the research. So it's easier to identify which companies are likely to be able to stay solvent for a while. So that failure rate goes down even more. Now, what's funny is even with the failure rate of 65%, the gains I made was 20x over what I put in, which is absolutely incredible. And 2/3 of what I, invested in failed completely. And yet I made 20x gains on everything based only on the third that survived. And that's because the gains with that trading strategy worked so well over the longer period.
I think with AI and crypto, the advantage that you have is that it's such a new market that there isn't as much data for it to analyze. And it can analyze things quickly, but with stock indices, bonds, etc., there's far more long-term data for it to crunch. So it's just too new to a certain extent for it to work that sort of stuff out. And it can only work on the data that you give it and then trade in the way that it wants to. Because remember, not everybody is a long-term investor. Some people are very short-term, medium term. There's all sorts of variations of that, of a theme of risk, etc., etc. So part of what AI does, like you're saying, research, it could help you with research, but can it work out? Will it give you an edge? Maybe. Will it give other people an edge? Possibly. But it's still, you have to know how to direct it and what to kind of feed out of or what to weed out of what it's showing you. Because the big problem I see right now is that it is very confident all the time with its answers to things, especially when they're wrong.
Especially when they're wrong.
Yeah. And it's like, it's from the chat GPT type answers that you get, you're seeing, it can be very useful. It can, and things that are like, if you put data in from a contract, for example, and it's a closed system, it can do extremely well of reading it and giving you information from it. But when it's pulling stuff off the internet, you have to be really careful with that, because it's reading Reddit and using YouTube and all that sort of stuff. And when it's giving you answers, those answers might be wrong. They might just be something that somebody's put in incorrectly, and therefore it's not really intelligence. It's just regurgitating information from else.
And sometimes people put information on the internet somewhat maliciously, right? So
exactly,
tend to cite news reports, and what it doesn't play into factor. I would suggest every news agency in the world is strongly biased.
Yeah.
And most of them are biased towards the left sides. The other ones that aren't are biased towards the right side, because they're writing to their audience and they're writing to persuade people to see politics the way they see politics. And so like everything has its bias. And so it's not actually, news isn't even objective. And yet AI presently uses those sources as if they're objective sources.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there something called ground news or ground truth news? There's an agency that aggregates all the news and can tell you whether it's got left or right bias, which is, I don't think a lot of the news agencies would admit that they have these biases, but you have to just
do a bunch of them. They're like, I'm not biased. It's like one of them is a big player at CNN, right? It's like, no, we just are covering the stories that are out there. And it's like, number one, there's selection bias. You cover the stories that you think people want to hear, but because they're what you want to be discussed, and you leave out what those on the other political spectrum, because at CNN, like 99% of the people that work there are like left wing to ultra left wing. So it's like, it's impossible for them to be objective, because what's going to be interesting to them isn't the same thing that's going to be interesting to somebody who's on the other political spectrum. And then on the flip side, right, somebody on a conservative news agency, they're just going to be interested in stories, different stories than the people, or interested on the other side of the stories than somebody who's maybe on the left side of the political wing.
Yeah, no, it is absolutely fascinating, and yeah, it's good to see a couple of people in the chat. We got Chris, who's just dropped his dog off at the groomers, which I can fully understand. My four-legged friend will probably be making an appearance at some point, at least in the background.
Yeah, we heard him last week.
Yeah,
he was trying to make his voice heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, obviously, postman going past, but yeah, sorry.
We got Willem, who suggests we take a look at NewNet, which would be more than happy to. Let's take a look at jump into the markets and what markets you're following before we jump over to crypto.
Yeah, look, a bit of a long intro for you guys that we've discussed, and it's just nice to chew the fat sometimes and just think when the market is doing these corrections as to thinking about the bigger themes. But so I'll just spin through the markets quickly because we've got the Fed announcement, just to reiterate, and that's in about an hour or two. And the Dow's correcting. I like this line. It's coming back to it. I think it's going to touch it and then rebound. This could possibly be some form of reversal pattern. So we get a bounce and then back down. I'm liking this as a head and shoulders pattern. So we'll see if that completes. We've also got the S&P, which is very flat, and given the war, it's not really gone down much. So that's hanging in there pretty nicely. So look, we're in this gray area. I'm not really sure, to be honest. But it doesn't look as bearish at this point as the news flow is showing. So that's all I would say. Nasdaq is relatively flat. VIX is coming off the highs, but that has been trending up quite aggressively. S&P, we know about that. DXY hit 100, so it went in for a last gasp move against that big resistance level. That looks pretty strong. It's reacted off it. It's probably about time the dollar starts to come down. That would really help. That would help a lot. It would help the markets a lot. So that might be a relief rally there. But also this whole spectrum of inflation, if the dollar's going down, oil's going up, and prices are going up, there will be a dilemma. So this is why this interest rate cut, we've talked about this long-term inflation problem. You're starting to see, sometimes you think the central banks can just solve the problem by doing one thing or another, but not always. The markets can make things tricky, and it's partly their fault, and it's partly, because of world events. And they obviously knew this was coming, but it's how the market reacts to it and what the market anticipates they're going to do. So we've seen 3-year money rally, we've seen 10-year money rally, but it's not excessive at this point. It's got the capacity to get out of hand. Let's have a look at 30-year, US 30-year yields. Yeah, I don't know if that's necessarily right, but that's in a range. It's not right data. So anyway, I don't know why that hasn't got all the data in there. But the 10-year yields, which I'd argue the most important, it's at a key level there. I don't think Trump would want to see this trading much higher. It would add to the burden of the national debt. That needs to get down. But they might not be so lucky. So we shall see. Perhaps it will have one final pullback and then we'll see it trade much higher. If I can show you an example of what this is doing in some other countries, the Aussie 10-year bond has been exploding higher. So it was doing something similar like this, and then it broke out and yields went up a lot. And they've just raised interest rates there, which I think is highly unusual. I mean, it's the right thing to do given inflation, but it's the wrong thing to do given fears in the market. So, I thought the next move would be a cut. I thought all central banks would cut because of war, and it seemed to be the natural thing to do, but I was completely wrong about that. But the move up in the yields I did see coming. So I think we're at this point here, equivalent on the 10-year for US bonds. So if you look at where we are here, 4.3%, look at how the chart looks. If we move to then the 10-year bond of the US, I think we're at this point, and it could just go like that up towards 5%. And that might happen even if they cut rates. So it will be because the market starts to fear inflation. So it's an interesting setup. So I personally would be very cautious of bonds. And if yields go up, that is an attraction of money that will come away from risk on. So it could pull equities down and it could pull Bitcoin a bit lower. But then things will settle, and I don't think the macro scenes are in a bad enough position for it to, totally collapse. I just think we're just going to see an extended correction, shake out the last few people, and we're going to a longer term rally. And actually, before we look at Bitcoin, I wanted to just jump into looking at MicroStrategy, because I think this is a really good one to keep watching, because we had this level at 102, which pointed out when it hit this. And that was on the 2nd of February. And look what's happened since. It's just slowly rallied up. It's had a rebound. But this is also partly why I'm slightly guarded on the chart of Bitcoin, because I think the two things, one will lead the other. I mean, I suppose Bitcoin should lead this, but sometimes equities can be a bit more sensitive. There is potential for it to squeeze a bit higher, and that would be good. But if we look at the overall setup, even if it gets to around 180 now, it's still got a lot of work to do before it gets out of this bear market. So my view is it will rally and then possibly come back down again, and maybe even take out this 102 to make a final low somewhere around here before we then see the markets move up. But as far as Bitcoin goes, this 74 area, which is 72 to 74 resistance area, it's gone into would have been some short-term buying. It's kind of come straight off it, which would suggest that the market isn't really ready to end this bear market, but that the signal for me is this downward trend line. So I want to see this go before I feel more comfortable about there being a low. And this isn't quite enough as yet, but with the wind behind it, it could get towards 80. I think we're at a really important pivotal point around here. This is such a big barrier, and we get a weekly close above 74 set to 75, then I think you'll see it squeeze. And but whether it'll get much beyond this resistance point at this stage, I'm not sure. I think there'll be quite a few people looking to bail. And then you might see some late players going, okay, it's all right now, it's going to go to 120, and then it will come off. So it's really psychological. Well, it's always psychological, but I think at the moment I'm reading it that way, that the short term is going to be driven by pure levels breaking, sentiment changing. We had a maximum low very recently, and you looked at the RSI and the extreme reading on the RSI last week, which is an interesting call, because it was at an extreme level. But you look at the volume here and how high that was and how low the level got to, that's almost always a good time to buy. But from a short-term perspective, whether it's from a long-term perspective, has always been open to debate. And again, I suppose you've got to define what your long-term is. But from a short-term perspective, it's worked well as a bounce, and it has squeezed from that, and we're still trying to work up from that. But when I say longer term, I mean the next few months, whether it will manage to get over this resistance line, or whether the kind of macro factors of rates going up will affect Bitcoin a bit more until we see some form of low coming in. What you would describe as some very cheap levels. And I think around about 47 to 50 would be very cheap, or some very good support down there. So in some ways, it would be interesting to see if it can get down there. But for the moment, I think we've got to just play it week to week. And I don't think it's going to do much more than have a short-term squeeze and an intermediate move down in the context of a longer term, bull market.
Yeah. This is one of the things that makes crypto hard, is the unpredictability, especially in the short term, because Bitcoin has the opportunity to break down to those lower levels. The question is, will it? Is it gone as low as it's going to go for the short term, or is it going to go so much lower? And it's hard to know. Even some of the long-term investors, for families that have been investing for hundreds of years, they said, You know, I never end up buying the bottom. I never end up selling the top. It's okay because in between there's so much money to be made. And it's true. I wish I had that magic crystal ball to be able to look at this and be like, okay, the exact bottom of Bitcoin is X, and it's just important. It's just impossible to really tell exactly where that number is. For example, like here on Bitcoin, could it break lower? Yeah, it looks like it wants to break to the upside, but sometimes this is a fake out and it will break down back again to these lower levels. Was interesting, Paul. You had the MicroStrategies chart up, and MicroStrategies introduces a form of leverage with Bitcoin. So MicroStrategies went to about $500 and then came back almost to $100. So that's about an 80% decrease, while Bitcoin went down about 50%. And that's the effect of leverage. So some people buying MicroStrategies, they want to take somewhat of a levered position. And I don't know, MicroStrategies, I like what Michael Saylor is doing. At some point, it could come crashing down around him because leverage introduces a huger variable of risk that if you're wrong in the short term, dramatically because it goes down, you could lose everything and then be right on your longer position. So it's like, that's why I don't trade with leverage. In buying MicroStrategies, I would rather have Bitcoin directly. But a lot of people disagreed with me when MicroStrategies was at 500. That was crazy. Look how much gains I made. Like, well, okay, we'll see how that plays out. Now, MicroStrategies is fairly conservative, so they may never get liquidated because they are fairly conservative.
Are they? Are they? I don't know. I'm not questioning that. I'm literally asking the question. I thought they were very much leverage, but
they are leverage, but their dollar cost average position is somewhat low. So they do just keep buying Bitcoin, and they borrow, and they were borrowing against their revenues of their software company to take out loans, low interest rates loans. And they were putting that into Bitcoin because on average, Bitcoin has appreciated historically at a rate that far, far, far exceeds whatever they were paying on their interest. So say they're paying 5% borrowing, and what is their strength is because some of their money isn't borrowed against the Bitcoin, it does lower their liquidation levels because there was a point in time where MicroStrategies was really upside down during the bear market when Bitcoin was at 14,000, and they were getting close to supposedly what their liquidation levels were, and it never hit it. But imagine it had gone down to 8,000 just even temporarily. That might have wiped out a company like MicroStrategies if they couldn't borrow additional funds to buy more Bitcoin at 8,000 to bring down their dollar cost average.
Well, I think you've said something here that I think is the most important thing of all, and that is that they're borrowing money. And the problem with borrowing money is if they're borrowing it at low levels, when the rate starts to go up, then their existing loans become more burdensome and their new loans become more difficult to buy, and they get squeezed at the wrong time, which is when things are going down, so that they get a three-pronged attack against them. And it's all well and good if the market goes up, which it will do in the long term, or should do in the long term. Nothing's ever guaranteed.
Yeah, should do is right.
But it's likely to in the long term. But it's, as you say, how long can you withstand the correction? So I was just interested in, I thought they borrowed money to buy. And so
to some extent, I think some of their money is borrowed against the Bitcoin to buy, which is direct leverage, right? So if I were able to borrow endless funds at, say, 3%, in that case, would I buy Bitcoin with it? I probably would. Like 3%, because the average on Bitcoin. Now, if Bitcoin ever crashes, well, I will crashes, goes away, gets hacked and becomes worthless. Well, shoot, I'll have no ability to repay those loans. But barring that happening, then it's a strategy to make amazing money over time, because over time. Bitcoin's appreciated it. I don't even remember what the long-term average is. It's like, it might even be 40% on average per year across the many years, which is, you're making the difference between 3% and 40% if it continues at that average. I don't know that it'll continue at that average. Probably that average will decrease. But even if it were at 20% average or 15% average, the difference between that 3% and the 15% is where you make incredible money over time. Let's jump and look at ETH, see what's going on with ETH's price, and then we'll jump and take a look at TAO, which is doing some interesting things. FET, which is an AI aggregate of the top AI companies, and then Hyper, which we've been keeping an eye on because it's been trading very interesting. And then we'll take a look at OMI.
Yeah. So ETH.
I'm going to step away just for a sec. I will be right back.
Okay. If I finish ETH, I'll go on to TAO. So what I see here, I kind of like the big picture here with ETH. I know we've got to take a big step back, and this is a long period of time, so I'm not downplaying the fact that this is a correction, but we've got this longer term trend line. Actually, it's not really a trend line, it's more a support line that comes in. I'm not going to change that to a solid line. It should be solid, but we've got this line coming in from the lows here, and as long as it holds above that in one form or another, then to me this whole area here is a big consolidation. And once we start to break out, we could see some really interesting moves. Now, I know there's a lot to do. There's a lot of work to do before we can get to anywhere near like 2.5. And this big trend line here is the big barrier that we're looking for to break. But I like to step back and look at the big picture. And until this line is taken out, I'm going to suggest that the big picture is still bullish, but we're in a massive consolidation. Now, in the short term, what we talked about last week was how this was potentially a base and the market would go up and it would be a short-term rally and it would probably fail and then come back down again. And given the way it's trading on the weekly, looks very much like that. It's taken this resistance out, which is where all the technical buy orders would come in, and it's come all the way back down again to flat. Now we'll have to see what happens by the end of the day or end of the week. Will it be more in this area here, recovering some of these losses, or will it be sort of below and back into this sort of danger zone or neutral zone? I suspect it'll be in this zone here. I think it will come down and then go back up again. So just to take all the stops out, which is markets in these environments do the most difficult thing for short-term traders. And so I think that's what it will do, just come down and then go back up again. But there is still this downward trend line to contend with before we can change the intermediate view, i.e. this trend from downwards to back up. So as far as ETH goes, still corrective. Short term, there's some opportunities if you're nimble. For me, it's a wait until things clarify. But if it does come against this support line, I think that might be a short term kind of buy point with a stop. That's how I would view it for me. I'm not saying anyone else should do that. I'm saying that's how I would view it. And what I'd like to see it react there. I wouldn't just blindly buy it. I want to see levels, support levels be respected before like jumping in on them. But small positions, sometimes exploratory positions, is what that's for. But for the moment, we're still trading carefully. There's a lot of still negative sentiment, which may be misplaced, but it still needs to work its way through the system. And so with regard to both ETH and Bitcoin, there's still intermediate rebounds before it tests further lows, I think, further out into the next quarter. So that's how that looks. So I'm going to move on to TAO because I think you're probably somewhere else still, unless there was something you wanted to add, but I guess not really. So TAO, let's see if I can get a better chart. Let's try. No, not a lot of data actually. So I'm not really sure what this one is about. TAO. Let's try this one. Okay, there's a bit more data here. So what do we do with this? We're seeing swings up and down in a fairly regular time pattern. So we've got this sharp upward move, resistance, support. It's kind of bouncing up and down, isn't it? Whether that's real or not, I'm not sure, but it seems an intermediate low with potential for a bit more of a rally. But has it broken out of this whole area yet? Has it given a definitive change in dynamics, either bullish or bearish? Not really. If we were to draw in some lines here, we can see resistance generally in this area and support generally across these lows. But it's not clean because the lows break below the previous lows. So if you're looking for, flat buy points, we're not getting them. They're kind of going downwards, which is difficult to deal with because you see a support, you buy against the support, and then it breaks it. And the resistance is still coming down. So I'm not really sure that this would be one that I'd have a particularly strong view, because it looks fairly random in some ways, because from where it is now, we're in the center of the range. If we could draw a line across that would split the range between the bottom and the top. And we're hitting resistance at 300 psychologicals. Really good point here. So if it goes through that, I would suggest it would attempt to move up towards here, towards the 400s, which is on paper a very big move and a good opportunity for people who are trading it short term. But it's it could also equally break up and just come straight back down again. It's not clear enough for me to be to want to take a position. It's more 60-40 than kind of the 80-20 or 70-30 outlook probability that I prefer. So for me, I'd say it's a wait, but if you're nimble, there could be some interesting moves for you. But as far as the big picture, it hasn't defined its trend yet. There's not a whole lot of data, and I don't know whether that's just the chart I've got here or whether there's a bit more from elsewhere, but it's pretty much range bound, and I'd like to hear a bit more. Maybe the fundamentals are more interesting than the chart at this point.
Well, good question. On the fundamental side, it falls into the blockchain AI narrative. So if we go to CoinMarketCap, and I love CoinMarketCap because it usually has some pretty good information about the companies. Now, what is BitTensor? Is a groundbreaking platform that stands at the intersection of blockchain technology and machine learning. It is designed as a decentralized network that fundamentally changes how AI is developed, shared, and monetized by utilizing a peer-to-peer intelligence market. So it's like, it's interesting. Will this ultimately be successful? I don't know. I know there's a lot of big VCs and people with big money that really believe in it. I like decentralization in most cases. Sometimes centralization makes sense. In AI, I'd like to find ways that decentralized AI really comes to be, so there aren't people in there putting their thumb on the scale so that the AI's learning gets skewed. I like that idea, but how does BitTensor do that? I can't say I fully understand the tech, but there's an interesting pump within the blockchain AI stuff just recently, and I'm not sure what's driving it. Maybe it's AI in general or whatever, but we see this a little bit in TAO. We see this a little bit in the next token we're going to look at. So is it a buy for me? No. I in cases like this, if I were going to buy something with a market cap this high, I like to buy along that lower trend line, and it's up from the lower trend line. So recently it was like at 168, it's at 267. I would prefer to look for windows when this is along that lower trend line. Or even better yet, it breaks down below that lower trend line, which for me is a gift. And then I buy, if I believe in their longer term future, I want to buy when the price is low, even though sometimes it'll go lower on me. It's just not low enough to be interesting. I want to buy when I feel like it's pretty low for the market conditions. And it's just gone up by 50% from what it was, over 50%. So it's not as cheap as it was. So for me, it would be a wait. Let's take a look at FET, because FET is also doing some interesting things recently.
Yeah. So FET it's corrected quite aggressively. So it started turning down, and it's not been a straight line move. We got the big sell off here, record volume, and then it's rallied above that. So it hasn't broken it. But interestingly, if we draw a trend line from the lows, they've all kind of lined up perfectly from the 2020 low to this low to these two lows. So this line is very, very key. Now I'm drawing that in, but I'm also drawing this one, which was the previous low. So obviously, this is done with hindsight in the sense that as it was coming down, we couldn't draw this line in. We'd be drawing this line, and the market resoundingly broke that, and then retested it as resistance and has been trading below it ever since. So that's why I'd be cautious on it, because this was the main trend line for quite some time that has now broken. And even though it's finding support on this lower trend line, it still has to prove itself that it's out of this downward trend, and it hasn't done that yet. So so for me, it's definitely a wait. This price action looks, if we were to take this trend line out, this price action is usually one that continues down. We've got falling highs, 1, 2, 3, if it stops here, and it would trigger on a break of this support line. Even if we took this line out, we would just draw that line in there on its own if it wasn't significant from these lows, and that would be a trigger point for a continued move. So that adds double weight to this trend line. If it breaks, then it could move down to the next big support point, which would be around 5 cents. But that's an if. That's the thing with technicals. It's if it does this, then this, and if it does that, then we look in a different way. But in this area here, I would describe it as a gray area, but one that I would be slightly more cautious, just because it's great that it has reflected a oversold market and had a rebound, and it's moved in an upward trend in this small area here, but it's not enough to change the trend, as you can see, because the highs are still falling. So I have to be neutral on it until I can see a definitive breakout. So for me, it's be a wait, but I'll be watching that line very closely, and I think we should come back to it in a couple of weeks and see where it is.
Yes, definitely going back up from this general trend, but that doesn't mean it's not going to continue down. Like when we look at what's happened the last month, so it bottomed out on the 8th of March and went up tremendously. So it went from 14 cents to 24 cents. And it seems like it's going to reverse the trend, but then on Paul's chart, you see the greater trend is still down. It's not clear that it has reversed that trend, because even in this greater downtrend, you see it comes up, comes back down, comes up, comes back down, comes up, might be going back down. So to me, it's a wait. It's not at the lower trend line. Should it break even farther down below that trend line, great. I like to buy cheap. Now, they're not extremely cheap. They're a $500 million market cap. But when the AI narrative within crypto really runs, this is what in the prime movers in it. So it can go to a much higher price. If we look historically, it was at $3.30. So it's like 92, 93% off right now from its highs from just back in March of 2024. So it's still a wait for me though. Let's take a look, because there's been some interesting movement on Hyperliquid, and we've been tracking that because it seems like it wants to break out.
Yeah, it certainly does. So yeah, I don't know what we said last time, but this was drawn in from before. We can see rising lows. This resistance line had broken and it's extended, which is really good. So this is actually trending quite nicely. I would say as long as it holds over this lower line, it's proving itself as a buy. So yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look back and see what we said before. I literally can't remember. But looking at it from where we are now, it's in an upward trend. It seems to be leading the market in many ways. So quite it's swimming definitely against the tide, as it were, because there aren't many products that are moving in this way. So that adds a level of caution, but it doesn't mean that what it's doing is wrong. It just means that there are fewer of these opportunities than there are of perhaps more bearish ones. But long may this move continue. There is a bit of resistance where it is now from this high, but there is some as we move higher towards $50. That is a big psychological level. So I would expect it to resist that if it gets up there. But beyond that, we don't have much. We only have like 60 and then that's it. So, I really hope that it does continue this trend and try and take out those levels. For me, the stop loss point, I always have to have a parachute level because, I'm not using fundamentals. I'm using just the chart and the price action. That would have to be this line here, this line that it's respected. It has moved away in terms of its acceleration from it. So that means risk against reward has to be adjusted, because if I'm buying it at $42 and putting my stop below kind of 34, that has to reflect the position size against where I'm expecting it to go to, So it may be a clean trade up to $50, but it might not go much beyond that. So I'd have to weigh that up as to whether it's worth almost taking a 50-50 trade, i.e. you lose pretty much what you're going to get if you're right. But that aside, I mean, another important stop point would actually be the breakout point at 38. So you could tighten it up and say it's a buy with a stop below this level here, because it's 1, 2 and then a good breakout. But if we're looking longer term, I would normally use a more significant trend line, because if it comes back into here and you get stopped out and it goes back up again, that can be a bit tedious. So giving it a bit more range but taking a smaller position is one thing that I would sometimes consider. So for me, I can't fault it at this point. That doesn't mean it's not going to come down. I have to say there isn't a lot of data, and that's something that adds a bit of caution. It might just be this chart, but it might just be that it's only started out in December 24. So we have to be mindful of the lack of data on the chart. And ordinarily, we'd expect it to be trading for a good few years in other traditional markets, but because it's in the altcoin market, we don't have that luxury. We have to deal with what's in front of us. But yeah, so for me, it would be a buy, but with caution and with stops at various levels in order to protect a reversal in sentiment, which is a normal thing anyway. I'm going to do that anyway, but particularly one that's moving against the tide.
Yeah. Hyperliquid is interesting. I do like within the DeFi space, I like Hyperliquid a lot. Now do I own it? No, its market cap is all the way at 9.32 billion. But it is essentially a perpetuals, kind of a DeFi trading platform. One of the things I like about crypto projects that are essentially trading platforms that are getting lots of traction is they have lots of revenues. And so Hyperliquid does have lots of revenues. I think their goal is to share revenues with their token holders. I like that model a lot. But this market cap, it feels really late to the game when you consider that it hasn't even been live all that long. it's hard to know if this price is cheap. It looks like it's breaking to the upside, and I wouldn't be surprised if it did further break to the upside. So it's actually had a couple breakout points. So it broke this trend here to the upside and has maintained it, came back down, broke out again to the upside. Now, is it ready to continue up? I don't know, but I like buying cheap, and it's hard to tell where cheap is because there's not much history on it. You can look back and be like, wow, $9 was really cheap, at least for the time being. So this is just a big weight for me. Not only is it in the blue chips range, it's high in the blue chips category. It's number 11 on CoinMarketCap. And so it's just getting way too much pressure and visibility and hype for me to be interested. It's not clear that it's cheap. Now, a lot of people like to trade where they feel the hype is, and that's okay. I just seen that unless you have really strong rules that on average stack the odds in your favor, it's a dangerous place to be trading, is where all the hype is. Because as that hype switches to something else and the narrative switches to something else, you can see all the gains that you're ahead get wiped out, and then you're severely in losses pretty quickly. So I like hype, great project. For me, it'd definitely be a wait. I want to buy when I feel like it's strongly cheap. It's not anywhere near that point. All right, let's take a look at OMI. Speaking of strongly cheap, we're getting in the category of the ones that I love and that I hold a lot of. And OMI is one of my biggest bags.
So it's approaching the all-time low, certainly on this chart, and whether it's one from way back, probably not, but you know, this is the data that I've got in front of me. But certainly the trend has been down, and we know that, and this is the big level, or one of the big levels that it needs to recover from a long-term perspective, to get it out of what I would say is a danger zone. More recently, we've got this big support level that it's coming back to have another look at. And interestingly, there's been a little bit of buying just ahead of it. So if we just zoom in, you can see how this was the big support point, and it was coming to touch it, and it's rallied here. But as you can probably see, this is not enough to even change this trend line, let alone this trend line. So again, it's still got a lot more work to do. My fear is that it will just keep pressing lower and take out this very big level. I mean, I'm not saying it will do that. I'm just saying if I was looking to buy it, I wouldn't want to see it much below there, because we could have a big reaction. Now, I know some people will use that as a buy point, and it might work very well. You know, if it holds over it, it could have quite a nice bounce, and it's already trying to do that. But that's very short-term trading, and I couldn't justify a long-term position as yet until it shows a bit more strength. Moving average is down, as you can see, it's still in a downward trend, and those things point to being a bit cautious from a technical point of view until we've seen other technical patterns that indicate the market's reversed. And I can't see anything at this point. There's no specific reversal pattern that I would look to jump on in the short term, other than it's very close to, you know, major support, which goes back to October last year. So October, November lows have been holding in, but that's kind of about it really for this at this point. So I know we're going to come back to it, look at it at another point. But for me, it still has to be a wait.
Yeah. All right, jumping over to it on my screen. And so this is what the chart looks like, right? And a lot of people, like, this is very juicy for what I like to buy. And let me just reference back, like, so many people can't buy this kind of thing. But I often tell you about how the bear market of 2018, 2019, 2020 was, and people that weren't here back then looking at projects that were severely price punished, they don't really understand it. But let me show you what it looked and felt like. This is what it looked and felt like. So this was one of the ones I identified, was one of my Actually, it was my favorite during the bear market. And this is Cardano. Now, it didn't even end up being my top performer for having the highest gains, but it was one of the ones that had the highest gains, and it's one of the ones I deployed the most capital into. And what's frustrating about when you're buying it going cheap, I started buying at 11 cents, which was about here. And then it went cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. It actually bottomed at 1.7 cents. So it can be really hard buying cheap because, as you see, it often goes cheaper. And you see this big momentum down. And during the middle of it, went all the way to like 11 cents and then came right back down. And then this uptrend started. So here we are on OMI. And the uptrend has not started. There's no indication that we're in the uptrend yet. And perhaps it even breaks down below these levels. I would see that as a good thing, just as when Cardano broke below 5 cents, I was excited because I was able to dollar cost average more. And, you know, emotionally, you're not excited because you're like, oh man, it's even cheaper. But logically, I was excited because I was like, I still believe in the future of this one and I want to buy as cheap as possible. And this is what fundamental contrarian trading is about. This is what I did in real estate, basically buying real estate when it was massively cheap and everyone was hating on it. And it feels like the same thing when you're buying things like OMI. And people say, when is it ever going to go up? It's never going to go up. It's dead. And they're just wrong. It feels like that. So they're acting off of how it feels rather than logically. DEVVE as a company has lots of revenues coming in. And they say, well, DEVVE is completely different. OMI, what does that have to do with DEVVE? And it's like, well, it's funny. In the crypto space, I mean, why did Cardano's token price go up? Yeah, you have to use Cardano to send transactions on the Cardano chain. But like, what is it that drives tokens to go up? And usually it's just the success of the project associated with it. Now, there are some fundamentals or some related to the token that make sense, and perhaps those are even going to get stronger, the actual use cases of the tokens, but it doesn't even have to have a strong use case to do well when that narrative does well. And so the biggest part of becoming absolutely rich in crypto is identifying undervalued tokens when nobody else seems to care. And even if you inform them on it, they won't buy because they can't buy, because they look at this type of chart and it feels like it'll never go up. Now, the challenge is when you're buying low, it'll often go lower on you. And it's being patient because it's not clear exactly when the altcoin run is going to happen. I think within this next year, possibly even much sooner than 12 months from now. Maybe even the next few months, but likely it'll be later this year when altcoins really have the run they haven't yet had. But will it happen for sure this year? No, there's no guarantees. And I liken a lot to counting cards when you play 21. And if you learn to count cards, what you're doing is you're playing with certain rules that on average are going to stack the chances in your favor. And that's what I use research to do. I use research and timing to stack the odds in my favor. So I want to buy projects that are well researched, that I feel like have a good team, strong fundamentals behind it, and they're outside the narrative. So they're extremely price punished, because to really make money in something, you have to buy low and sell high. When are things the lowest? Well, when everybody is talking bad about them. So what is the case? OMI is strongly in that narrative. So many people can't see the future. This is how I made so much money from Cardano, made so much money from Axie Infinity. At its lows, nobody could see that there was any future for them. And then they reversed so high that the gains were amazing. And I think OMI is one of those. So OMI gets a massive buy from me at this price. And yeah, I wish I could borrow unlimited funds at 3%, and I would put a ton of that into OMI. I'd set aside like 2.5 years of payments out of those borrowed funds just to make the payments for me, and the rest I'd deploy into some of these ones that I love, and OMI would definitely get a big chunk of that. All right. We had another request to look at. Oh, we need to jump over to
NewNet.
NewNet, and then we'll take a look at DEVVE.
Yeah. So NewNet, I think the last time we looked at it, we were examining how it was close to this prior low and how it would react. And it's obviously reacted negatively. And it was in this range here where it consolidated, broke the low and then consolidated, sort of played around this range. But this price action was looking very much like it wanted to continue down. This compression is sometimes an indication that the market will continue lower. It wasn't enough for what we would call a reversal pattern. It was more a continuation pattern, which means that the market would just keep going in the previous direction. So it seems like since then it has actually done that. And the low point of the chart around this 46.91 has been closely tested and it's bounced from there. So we've had some form of reaction, but it's not enough to get it away from that as a danger zone. So the rally isn't powerful enough or clean enough for me to feel that this is the low. And I know there will be some people who want to buy in because it's close to that, and that all strategies can be valid, but the probabilities for me is still pointing to the downside. So I have to wait until I get more evidence that this move is over. Now, what would break that was if it comes up, and we could keep this line in, if it can break back above this resistance point, that would be a first step. But certainly getting above this low, because we know that there was buying into there, and we know there was buying all the way into this point. So getting back above there, I think, is fairly crucial for its long-term health. Could quite easily do it quickly. You know, this is the thing, things do turn around, but it just has to match the probability of the way the chart's looking. And at the moment it doesn't. So at this point in time, I'm going to say for me, it's a wait, but happy to revisit it. And if it's moving quickly, definitely put it on the list.
Yes, NewNet is one that I've liked for a long time. I don't presently own any, and I'll show you why I don't presently own any, but I really like where it's at right now. Thank you for suggesting us to look at it, Willem. And I appreciate the fundamentals. NewNet has reached a major network live milestone as of March 2nd, 2026. So that's some big news. Sometimes we can get really good news right here on CoinMarketCap. If you go where I'm super bullish on NTX, probably one of the most undervalued, useful projects in crypto. NTX, same jaded guy who bought high and sold low, continues to drive desperately fighting. You can get some pretty good information here on the right side sometimes. Price in USD paid in NTX with real-time conversion. Every transaction flows through the token. USD just removes friction. Real infrastructure needs real-world pricing. So you're getting some good information. Farther down, some things that I really like about it now is that a huge percent of the tokens have now vested. Now, look, it had a really steep vesting curve like this for a while, and now it's really slowed down. So there's not a lot of price pressure from whales that hold it. A lot of that has happened. Now, I did have NTX. And here's where I sold it. During the bear market, it went up, and it doesn't fully show. It went up to like 11.5 cents during the bear market, and most everything else was cheap. And so during the bear market, when one of mine really pops off like this, and it did, it went from under a penny to over 11 cents, it was just time to harvest it like crazy because it was massively up when everything was down. And as you see in a bear market, like, things come into the narrative, but then it changes. So I haven't rebought into it, but if I have one of my positions just go up some from where they're at, I wouldn't mind buying back into this. This is one of the projects that has always caught my attention. And the reason is they're a decentralized competitor to Render. Well, Render's decentralized too, but NewNet is just such a smaller market cap, but when Render runs, this one can run a lot more, and those are the horses I like to bet on. So $2.62 million market cap looking at Render. Render's at just under $1 billion market cap. So if NewNet went 400x, almost 400x, it would be close to the market cap of Render. Now look in the last month what Render's price has done, and you see a similar trend in some ways to this, that it went down and then it had a run this last week or so before correcting down. So this correction downward is good because I don't know about you, but I like to buy cheap, and it's pretty much as cheap as it's been this whole bear market. It's at half a penny. And so it's a really good, I like this trend. Maybe it gets even cheaper. Maybe it doesn't, but it's cheap enough to satisfy my green buy zone where I like to buy it. And it seems like they're continuing to work hard. What I really like about this position in the bear market is they say when the tide goes out, you can see who's not wearing any pants or any shorts. That's the case in the bear market. When the tide goes out, or all the hype goes out, you see who's really committed and who's really working during the bear market. And I'm liking what I'm seeing from the NewNet team. So I actually would definitely put this in the buy zone for me. So it gets a buy for me. All right, good suggestion. Let's take, right here, Vidiman. One thing about NewNet, it received Catalyst funding and achieved their objects. Now they are mainnet, are part of the ASI Alliance. Do not be surprised if you hear Amazon, Google, or Microsoft interest. Hey, that's some good alpha. Thank you. All right, let's take a look over at DEVVE.
Yeah. Yeah. So DEVVE. It's probably hang on, sorry, let's find a good one. Is it that one? Yeah. So fairly straightforward what we have to say here. Since breaking this low, the trend has been down, had a rebound, but not enough to actually completely change the trend. Yeah, it's still negative. I'm gonna have to say it's a wait. It's gonna be a fairly quick one, unfortunately. There's if we were to extend this trend line down, it's got to at least break that before we get bullish, or make some form of reversal, some kind of reversal pattern, and there isn't one. So for me, it's definitely a wait.
Yeah, not clear that it's ready to reverse. So DEVVE I've covered a lot. Now DEVVE's one of my largest holdings in crypto myself, and I've liked this project a lot. It's at a price right now that is extremely low. And is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, as I've shared a lot in the last couple of weeks, there's been some shifts in the project. First of all, way back when during the bear market, when Joe Biden was still president and Gary Gensler was head of the SEC, they were finding an excuse to declare anything they wanted as a security and cause major problems for the company. So DEVVE split itself into DEVVE and then the Forever Foundation, which then managed the tokens. It was a similar approach to what Cardano had done. And so then the Forever Association was out of Switzerland and was managing the tokens and whatever. So really what that equates to is it increases overhead a ton for perceived regulatory compliance. What they were trying to do is being compliant to the regulators while burning a lot of their funds to be quote unquote compliant and trying to do the right thing. Well, with the change in the SEC, that kind of situation has no longer become necessary at all and wasted funds. Secondly, Ray, one of the founders of the company, left, and some other team members were let go in order to decrease the overhead of the company tremendously. So suddenly, as things start to go bad for them, the token, well, bad for them, I mean, it's good and bad. You never like to see shakeups like that. But at the same time, it makes their company way more lean so that they can have a much longer runway, as well as their revenues go so much farther. And so their token price fell tremendously, like tremendously. It was already cheap at 50 cents, and here it went to under 4 cents. Now, why is that? I suspect that some of the team members who were let go or that left have their tokens from helping from the early days of the project, and they've been cashing them out, and that is what's caused this massive price decrease. If that's where those are from, then often these massive price decreases are just temporary, because eventually they run out of those tokens to sell, and there's no longer any sellers willing to sell at these low prices, and that the price then recovers. So I think this is a buy. Now, I love OMI's situation. I love DEVVE's situation, because the revenues they have coming in put them in a very stable environment. I don't know what DEVVE's revenues are, but if they have any at all, they're not high. So I don't think they're out of the woods with that yet, as far as actual revenues from customers coming in, which is a part, really a transition that can really keep a project alive. Now they have opportunities for that. I mean, DEVVE built, and FIOS, they built the Litcraft ecosystem, and the Litcraft ecosystem, when blockchain gaming gets some traction, they can make a lot of money, and they do make some money as things are transacted on that. I don't know that the numbers are really big, not in this kind of bear market, but those market transactions feed them some revenues. And if gaming takes off, then we've got incoming revenues coming in that can be substantial if their game really takes off. They have other things that they're working on right now, a big directional shift to AI, and making kind of an aggregator that can access all the different AIs. And so you can have the AIs double check each other. And they're doing a new round of fundraising for equity, I believe, on the FIOS side of things, so that they can raise funds to really fund further development, but also fund customer acquisition. And it would be paying customers that would help them make that shift to where they have incoming revenues that give them a higher level of stability. Now, if you look across the crypto space, most crypto projects in general don't have revenues coming in or meaningful revenues coming in. So DEVVE's in line with those. That doesn't yet have meaningful revenues coming in that really stabilize it. So it's still at a riskier point than I'd say something like OMI is and something like DEVVE is. Its market cap is extremely price punished for a layer one blockchain that can do up to 8 million transactions per second, according to their benchmark. That is a crazy low price. Now, I do think this is an extreme buy zone because of all that selling by the team members, which is what I think has driven this. I mean, their initial token offering price was at 30 cents. And those who got it in the pre-sale got it like 27 cents, I think 22 cents. Now, when I bought it very, very early days, my price was 9.5 cents per token. And myself and some other investors that bought, a bunch of the people I know that bought a bunch of DEVVE, we got it at really one of the lowest prices ever. So nobody can afford to sell at these prices without selling at a big loss. But team members who got it through earned, through being part of the team in the early days, well, they can sell at these prices, and they might take their funds to pay for other things or maybe roll into other investments. They could sell and in some ways be profitable. So I think that's a lot of what's driven this. And I think this is temporary. Cool. So, I've been following Tom and what's going on with DEVVE closely. I do think this is massively undervalued. I appreciate that they've leaned out so that they can extend their runway tremendously. That's a critical part of me still believing in them, is that they've got plenty of runway. All right. Cool. Well, that's what we've got for this week. Well, thanks for joining us, Paul.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, interesting times, and we'll see what happens after the, after the Fed decision. We'll see how the market takes it, and look forward to seeing you next week.
All right.
Leon. Thank you.
Great seeing you.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, so this kind of market washes out tons of people, and you've seen it. If you've been in this audience for a while, you've seen people fall along the way. And this is normal for bear markets. It's especially normal when price pressure to the downside has people depressed about where their portfolios are. And it's part of why such a few percentage of people make so much money in crypto when most people lose money or they don't make meaningful gains, is because few people have the patience and the long-term belief to be able to buy when things are extremely cheap like this. Now, logically, it makes sense that we make money by buying low and selling high. But even though it makes so much sense, you see that it's just a few percentage of people that as they soak it in and they observe what's going on, that they resonate with this, that, oh my gosh, prices are lower than ever before. And now is the time to be buying, not panicking out. Now is the time to be researching and seeing which companies have enough runway, which companies are still working hard, which companies might stand a strong chance to come into the narrative later and have a big upside, and then taking the risk on those companies when almost everyone else isn't. It's those ones that find that part that resonates within themselves that become savage investors, that become what I call the Navy SEALs of crypto investing. Because if you think about it, Navy SEALs are running into where the bullets are coming from. And that's against intuition. Human intuition would tell you to run the other way. And it's only a small percentage of people through training or just who they are that can make it in these times and make the choices that will lead them to the kind of futures everyone dreams about, but few people take the right actions towards. Now, a lot of those people that it resonates with, they take the time to join our Patreon, which gives them access to the private Discord. And what's critical about the private Discord is you're surrounding yourself with like-minded people. You also get a lot of alpha there, not just from me, but other people who think the same way. And you're surrounding yourself by people like this. And what's critical about that is you become the 5 people you're closest to and spend the most time around. So if in the crypto space, it makes sense to me, and it makes sense to a lot of people, that you surround yourself with people who are also wired this way. All right, everyone, you have a great week. For those in our private Discord, I will see you all Friday. And the rest of you, I might not see you till Monday. See you soon. Enjoy the wrap.
Came into the space, chasing all of the gains, chasing the pumps and all of the hype trains. But like in life, shit bad before you could. Was told to buy when it was pouring like a rainmaker should. I buy when it's down, don't chase the boats that I miss. Cause I always made the time in mind. I take the one out cause I'm patient like that. And I'll wait for the right time. I sell when it's high, I buy when it's low. They call me rich, they call me smart. I'm just a rainmaker running the show. Calculated investments, I don't lead with my heart. The principles are simple, they're leaving a mark. Buy when it's boring, just gotta be smart. I sell when it's hype, like all the channels they pump it. That's when I was selling, go parabolic and dump it. They call me rich, they call me smart. I'm a rainmaker, making my own start. I'm with the future, learning the past. Makes it time fly by, years going so fast. The game plan is mine, I'll own it now. When I reach the top, haters asking me how. Cause I'm a rainmaker, investments I love. And I follow what I learn, not relying on luck. Time is never better, the time like the present. This next 5 years is a gift and it's feeling like heaven. I'm committed to learn, studying to know that nothing comes easy but with knowledge the game show. Sticking out this wrong cause soon will come a bear market. We're learning and growing and when it's slow will be the target. Naysayers come out, Bitcoin is dead. The massive decreases can get to time is better. Strong like that, I'll let the others be fretters. 2 years time, the ball will bring back the gains. That makes it worth the effort, cause here comes the rain. So let's go rainmakers, let's make it all happen. They go with the hate, let the haters be crapping. I'm here for 5 years, let's do this together. The time is right, the time could be better. They call me rich, they call me smart. I'm a rainmaker, making my own start. I'm with the future, learning the past. Made the time fly by, years going so fast. The game plan is mine, I'll own it now. When I reach the top, haters asking me how. Cause I'm a rainmaker, investments I love. And I'll follow what I learn, not relying on luck. Haters be hating, the time to slow down. Addressing what they say when I'm wearing my crown. They're chasing green candles like someone who was new. I got a vision that was bigger, helping me to push through. I'm still human and sometimes it is rough. And that's what makes me special, simply I stay tough. Cause I'm a rainmaker, investments I love. And I follow what I learn, not relying on luck.